My sister lied to my parents and said I dropped out of medical school. 5 years of silence. No wedding invite, no graduation. Last month, she was rushed to the ER bleeding out, and I was the surgeon who walked through the door. The pager went off at 3:07 a.m. I was already half awake. Trauma surgeons learn to sleep the way submarines run, close to the surface, ready to breach. I had the pager in my hand before the second pulse. Level 1 activation. Female 35. Blunt abdominal trauma. Hemodynamically unstable. ETA 8 minutes. I was dressed in 4. In the ambulance bay in 6. The intake iPad was warm from the charging dock. I swiped to the incoming chart the way I'd done 1,000 times. Patient demographics, vitals, mechanism of injury, scanning fast, building the picture before the doors even opened. Patient, Monica Willett. DOB March 14, 1990. I stopped. Emergency contact, Gerald Willett, father. The ambulance was pulling into the bay. The team was moving around me. Paramedics relaying handoff information. A nurse already prepping the trauma bay. My second-year resident, Dr. Ahmed Khalil, calling out the vitals. The world was doing what trauma bays do at 3 a.m., which is move at a speed that doesn't allow for personal crises. I set the iPad down. I scrubbed in. Because that is what you do when your sister is bleeding out on a gurney. You put on gloves, and you do not let your hands shake, and you do the only thing you have ever been genuinely certain of in your entire life. You cut, and you save, and you deal with everything else afterward. Let me tell you about Monica before I tell you about what came next, because none of this makes sense without understanding what kind of person she is. Monica Willett is 4 years older than me. Growing up, she was the one who got the grades without trying, the one who teachers called naturally gifted, the one who our parents talked about at dinner parties with a specific pride that felt more like ownership than affection. She was beautiful and socially effortless in the way that some people simply are, and she knew it, and she knew how to use it the way a carpenter knows how to use a good hammer, efficiently, without waste. I was not Monica. I was the quiet one, the one who got the same grades but had to study for them, who had to ask for things Monica was simply handed. I went to University of Connecticut on a partial scholarship, biology major, pre-med track, and I worked 20 hours a week at a campus bookstore and ate a lot of dining hall pasta, and was genuinely, almost embarrassingly, happy about it, because I knew what I was building toward. I was going to be a surgeon. Not because my parents expected it. They expected nothing particular from me, which is its own kind of damage, but because I had known since I was 14 and watched a cardiothoracic surgeon explain my grandfather's triple bypass in terms that were simultaneously terrifying and perfectly precise, that this was the work I was supposed to do. Organized chaos, impossible stakes, the specific clarity that only exists when the margin for error is 0. I got into medical school at University of Connecticut School of Medicine on my first application. I was 22. My father shook my hand. My mother cried. Monica hugged me and said she was so proud, and she smiled the whole way through dinner, and I did not notice, because I had no reason to yet, that her smile never quite reached her eyes. That was the last good night I remember. Third year of medical school is when it happened. Sarah Okonkwo had been my best friend since the first week of undergrad. She was from Lagos originally, had a laugh that you could hear from 2 floors away, was studying to be an environmental engineer, and could beat me at chess in under 15 moves every single time we played. She was 26 when she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There is no good version of that sentence. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer is not a diagnosis that comes with options. It comes with percentages, grim ones, and a timeline, and a series of decisions about how you want to spend the time you have left. Sarah had no family in the United States. Her mother was in Lagos. Her father had passed 2 years earlier. She had friends, including me, and a landlord, and a hospital system that was efficient and competent, and entirely incapable of sitting with her at 3 a.m. when the pain broke through the medication and she couldn't sleep and she didn't want to die alone in the dark. I called Dean Patricia Howell's office on a Tuesday morning in October of my 3rd year. Dr. Howell, and 28 years in academic medicine, the kind of administrator who had seen everything and judged very little of it, heard me out in full. I explained the situation. I explained my plan. A formal medical leave of absence. Fully documented, full intention to return in January. The minimum gap necessary to not lose academic standing. She approved it the same afternoon. The paperwork was in my file by 4 p.m. and in my email by 4:15. I called Monica that evening. I need to tell you something, I said, before you hear it another way. I explained the leave of absence. I explained Sarah. I explained that I would be back in January and that my standing was protected and that the dean had the documentation. I just don't want mom and dad to worry, I said. Don't say anything yet. I'll tell them myself when I'm back on track. Of course, Monica said. I won't say a word. I know they'd just worry. 3 days later, she called them. I don't know every lie she told. I've tried over the years to reconstruct the version that reached my parents, and the picture I've assembled is partial and secondhand, and still somehow worse than anything I could have invented. The version that reached my parents included a boyfriend, unnamed, older, a bad influence. It included a drug problem. Nothing specific, just the word substances deployed in that careful, grave way that implies everything while committing to nothing. It included me throwing away everything they'd sacrificed for. It included Monica, reluctantly, having tried to reach me, having begged me to call them, having been refused. My father called at 11:04 p.m. on a Thursday. I was in a plastic chair beside Sarah's hospital bed in the oncology ward at Hartford Hospital. Sarah was asleep finally after 2 hours of pain that her medications were no longer fully managing. The room smelled like antiseptic and the bergamot lotion I'd brought her because she liked it. Your sister told us everything, my father said. My stomach dropped. Not the way a stomach drops in a movie. Not dramatic. Not slow motion. Fast and cold, like stepping stepping off a curb you didn't see. Dad, I said, keeping my voice low because I was in a hospital room. I'm in a hospital right now. I'm taking care of my friend. She's sleeping. Can I call you back in the morning and explain everything? Silence. I have the dean's documentation. I'll email it to you tonight. The leave is approved. I'm going back in January. Monica said you'd have a story ready. The line went dead at 11:08 p.m. 4 minutes. That was the whole conversation. I sat in that plastic chair in the dark for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and started making calls. 14 calls in 5 days. Every single one went to voicemail. The emails, 2 of them, with Dean Howell's signed leave of absence documentation attached as PDFs, bounced back from my mother's account with an auto reply that said her inbox was full and came back unread from my father's. I drove to the post office on a Wednesday morning and mailed a handwritten letter by priority post, certified mail, tracking number and everything. 4 pages. I explained the situation from the beginning. I described Sarah. I described the leave documentation. I included a printed copy of Dean Howell's approval letter, signed and dated. 12 days later, the envelope came back. My mother's handwriting on the front, returned to sender. The seal was unbroken. She hadn't opened it. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Hartford post office with that envelope in my hands, and I allowed myself exactly 6 minutes of whatever it was I was feeling, something between grief and disbelief and a cold, settling rage. And then I put it in my bag, drove back to Sarah's apartment, and made her soup because the hospital food had stopped appealing to her, and she needed to eat. Sarah died on a Sunday in December, at 6:22 in the morning. It had snowed the night before. The window of her room looked out over a parking structure, and the snow had covered the top level, and it was white and quiet, and the light was just starting to come through. I was the only one in the room. I held her hand until it was over. Then I went back to the apartment I'd been crashing in, showered, packed my bag, and drove to campus. I had a meeting with Dr. Howell the following morning to begin the reinstatement process. I was going back. There was no world in which I was not going back. I want to tell you about what I did with the letter my mother returned unopened. I kept it. I put it in a manila folder with the tracking confirmation and the bounce notifications from the emails and the call log from my phone showing 14 outgoing calls in 5 days. It was the beginning. I didn't know it was the beginning. At 25, sitting in a post office parking lot, I wasn't thinking about evidence or documentation or a future moment when I would need to prove what had been done to me. I was just a person who filed things because filing things was what kept me organized, and organization was what kept me functional, but I kept it all. Every piece of paper, every returned letter. I returned to medical school in January, 3 months after the leave began, exactly as I'd told my parents I would. I had no support from my family. Financially, they had never been a significant factor. Emotionally, I was now operating with a deficit I didn't yet know how to name. I took out additional loans. I ate a lot of hospital cafeteria food on overnight study sessions. I had 2 close friends from my cohort, David Park and Letitia Barros, who knew enough of the situation to occasionally leave coffee outside my apartment door. I graduated in May, 2.5 years later, with honors. My parents didn't come. I matched into surgical residency at Yale New Haven Hospital, one of the most competitive programs in the country. My parents didn't know. I married Nathan Osei, a civil engineer from Accra. Patient and steady and so quietly funny, it took me 3 months to realize I was in love with him. In a ceremony in Hartford with 42 people in attendance, my medical school friends and Nathan's family filling a sunlit hall. My family didn't come because they weren't invited because I had stopped trying. The name on the department door at Mercy Rest Medical Center read, Dr. Irene Woolett, MD, Fax, Chief of Trauma Surgery. I had been chief for 2 years. My parents had never seen it. Here is what I learned much later. Some of it from my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, who had been quietly horrified for years and didn't know how to say so. Some of it from Nathan, who had the kind of methodical patience that made him very good at tracing things. Monica had not told one lie and moved on. She had maintained it, actively, for 5 years. She told our grandmother, who died 3 years later never having spoken to me again, that I was homeless. Not broke, not struggling. Homeless. She told our uncle's wife, at a family Christmas I didn't know was happening, that I was in and out of rehab, that the boyfriend had gotten me into something I couldn't get out of. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. That she had tried so many times and I wouldn't accept help. She told our mother on a Christmas Eve, crying, that she had managed to get a phone number for me, that she had called, that I had picked up and told her I didn't want anything to do with the family and hung up. She had never called me. She also called my medical school twice, attempting to have my leave of absence status reviewed. My name as a possible liability, some suggestion about whether my documentation was legitimate, whether the medical school ought to investigate. Dr. Patricia Howell, department chair, 28 years in academic medicine, a woman who had weathered every kind of petty institutional warfare and had no patience for any of it, took the second call herself. She documented both calls in my file, with timestamps. She called me afterward, 3 weeks into my return, during a study break. Irene, she said in her direct, unhurried way, I want you to know this is in your file, not as a problem, as a record. She paused. Someone is working hard to create a different story about you. I thought you should know that's already failed. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in the medical school library for a very long time, looking at nothing. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Documentation to Monica. I started filling it. My Aunt Carol came to me 18 months after I graduated. She drove up from Fairfield County to Hartford on a Saturday in October and sat in my kitchen with Nathan and told me the shape of it as best she understood it. She had a careful way of speaking, pausing between sentences as if she was checking each one before she released it, that made the whole conversation feel like a deposition. I don't know why she did it, Carol said. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, not drinking from it, just holding it. I don't think she thought it would go this far. And then it kept going and she couldn't stop without admitting it, and so she just kept going. She tried to have my leave revoked, I said. She called my medical school. Carol closed her eyes briefly. I didn't know that. The dean documented it. Both calls. Time-stamped. Silence. My father returned a certified letter without opening it, I said. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. Carol set down the mug. Irene, I'm not looking for an apology from you, I said. I'm not looking for anything. I just need you to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding that got out of hand. This was deliberate. She called my school twice. She told grandmother I was homeless. I looked at her. Grandma died thinking her granddaughter was living on the street. Carol left 2 hours later. She hugged me at the door for a long time. I let her. Nathan and I didn't talk much that evening. He made dinner. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder open on my laptop, going through the documentation, updating it, adding dates, cross-referencing the timeline with what Carol had told me. When he set the plate in front of me, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder. That was it. That was all. Nathan was like that. He understood that some things didn't need a speech. I need to tell you about the night before the accident. Not because it's dramatic, it isn't, but because it matters. I was on call. This was routine. I was a trauma surgeon, and being on call was like breathing. You didn't decide to do it, you just did. I was doing paperwork in my office at 11 p.m. when my resident, Dr. Ahmed Khalil, second year, brilliant instincts, annoying habit of humming while he charted, knocked and stuck his head in. Night's quiet, he said. Don't say that out loud, I said, because every surgeon is at least a little superstitious about quiet nights. He laughed and went back to his charting. The pager went off at 3:07 a.m. Monica was 35 years old and she had been in a car accident on I-84 westbound. The other driver had run a red at an intersection near the on-ramp, T-boned her passenger side, sent her car across 2 lanes and into a concrete barrier. Blunt abdominal trauma. By the time the paramedics reached her, she was hypotensive and losing pressure fast. The trauma bay organized itself the way it always does. Controlled chaos, everyone with a role, everyone moving. I called the surgery before we had her fully stabilized, because the imaging was fast and what I could see on the ultrasound was enough. Ruptured spleen. Grade 3 liver laceration on top of it. 2 bleeding vessels that needed to be ligated immediately. I scrubbed in at 3:31 a.m. I want to be very clear about what happened in that operating room. I did not hesitate. I did not have a moment of internal conflict about whether to operate on my sister. I am a trauma surgeon. The patient on my table was bleeding. Those 2 facts were the only facts that existed in that space. I operated for 3 hours and 41 minutes. When I placed the final stitch, Dr. Khalil, who had been at my elbow the entire time, said quietly, "That was flawless." I peeled off my gloves. I washed my hands. I stood at the sink for a moment with the water running over my wrists. Then I walked toward the waiting room. The family waiting room at Mercy Rest is beige and fluorescent, and lined with chairs upholstered in a blue-green fabric the color of hospital scrubs, which seems like a design decision someone made without fully thinking through. There are 2 end tables with magazines from 2021 and a small television in the corner that plays cable news on mute. It is not a comfortable room. It is not designed to be. My parents were in the center row. My mother was in a bathrobe, the gray flannel one she'd had for years, the one with the belt that always came undone. She had her slippers on the wrong feet. My father was in flannel pajamas and a coat he'd pulled on over them, the kind of gray-faced urgent dressing you do when a phone call wakes you at 3 a.m. and tells you your child is on her way to an emergency room. My father had been telling the waiting room staff, I learned later, that his daughter was in there. "She's all we have," he kept saying. "She's all we have," as if I had never existed. I stood in the doorway for exactly 1 breath. My mother looked up first. She registered my scrubs, my badge, my face, in that order, and her arms started lifting before her brain had fully processed what she was seeing. Irene, the word came out strange, cracked in the middle. Oh my God. I took 1 step back. Not dramatic, not cruel, just clear. Her arms hung in the air, then slowly fell. My father stood. He looked at my face, then at my badge. Dr. Irene Woulette, MD, FACS, Chief of Trauma Surgery, Mercy Rest Medical Center, then at my face again. He did this twice, as if the badge and the face couldn't both be real at the same time. I kept my voice in the register I use for every family in that room. Calm, clinical, not cold, present, just professional. Mr. and Mrs. Woulette, not mom, not dad. Your daughter Monica sustained a ruptured spleen and a grade 3 liver laceration in the accident. We performed an exploratory laparotomy. Both injuries have been repaired. She is stable. She'll be moved to the surgical ICU within the hour, and a nurse will come get you when she's settled. Silence. My father's mouth was working. He was searching for the right response and not finding it, which was unusual. My father had always had a response. "You're a doctor," he finally said. "I am. But Monica said I dropped out." I held his gaze. "I graduated. I completed surgical residency at Yale New Haven. I've been chief of this department for 2 years." I paused. "You would have known that if you'd opened 1 letter." Behind me, through the partition glass, I was aware of 3 nurses who had stopped moving. My father sat back down in his chair, slowly, like something structural had given way inside him. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. It wasn't crying exactly. It was something underneath crying. "I need to complete my post-op notes," I said. "A nurse will update you when Monica is settled. If you have medical questions, you can ask to speak with Dr. Khalil." I turned to go. Irene, my father's voice, rough, small, in a way I'd never heard. I stopped. I didn't turn around. "We didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. "That was the point." I walked back through the double doors. What followed is less cinematic than what came before it, but I think it's the part that matters most. Monica was in the surgical ICU for 4 days. I was not her attending. Dr. Khalil covered her case. case, supervised by Dr. Priya Nair, our department's senior intensivist. Dr. Nair had 22 years in critical care, and the particular composure that comes from having seen people at their absolute worst and most fragile for 2 decades. She knew the situation. She handled it with the discretion I would expect from her. On day 2, a hospital social worker named Gwen Massey, licensed clinical social worker, 14 years in acute care, knocked on my office door. She was not there to judge anyone. She was there because when families reunite in hospital settings under crisis, there is paperwork and protocol, and a human being whose job it is to make sure the reunion doesn't cause additional harm to the patient or the staff. She sat across from me and asked careful questions in a careful way, and I answered them in the same way. I showed her the documentation folder, not all of it, the highlights, the returned letter with its postmark and tracking number, Dr. Howell's notes about the phone calls to my medical school, the call log from the 14 unanswered calls. I showed her the email from my Aunt Carol, sent 2 years ago, explaining what she'd witnessed at Christmas. Gwen was quiet for a long time, reading. "You've kept very thorough records," she said. "I'm a surgeon," I said. "We document everything." She closed the folder and looked at me. "Are you all right?" I thought about that. "I've been all right for a long time," I said. "I think I'll continue to be." On day 3, my mother came to my office. I didn't invite her. She came because she is a woman who, when she has decided to do something, does it regardless of whether the environment invites her. She knocked twice, opened the door without waiting for an answer, and sat down in the chair across from my desk. She looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't know how to hold that. "I need to say something," she said. "Okay." I returned your letter without opening it. Her voice was steady. She had prepared this. I didn't read it because I was afraid of what it would say, because if it said something I had to believe, I would have to admit that I'd already done the wrong thing, and I didn't want to admit that. She paused. "That was a coward's choice. I made it. I own it." I looked at her. "Monica told us." "I know what Monica told you. She called your school," my mother said. I watched her face as she said it, watched her absorb again what that meant. "Gwen Massey told me she showed her the documentation, the time-stamped records. Dr. Howell documented both calls in my file," I said, "in real time, because she believed me and she wanted me to have a record. You would have had one too, if you'd opened the letter." My mother's hands were in her lap, pressed flat against her knees. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I'm not here to ask for it. I'm here because I owe you the truth of what I did, and I owe it to you to say it to your face." She paused. "I let a lie live because believing it was easier than coming to you, and I've spent 5 years living in a house with your absence in every room, telling myself it was your fault. And it wasn't." The room was very quiet. "It wasn't entirely yours," I said. Finally, she looked up. "Monica told you something that was designed to be believed. She knew your fears. She knew what language would land. She built it carefully." I paused. "That doesn't excuse the letter. Nothing excuses the letter. But I understand how someone gets there." My mother's eyes were wet. She didn't let herself cry, which was such a her thing to do, that something in my chest moved in a way I hadn't expected. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She left 10 minutes later. I sat at my desk for a long time. Monica was discharged on a Friday afternoon. I was not in the building when she left. My father came to my office on Thursday morning, the day before. He sat where my mother had sat, and he looked at his hands for a long time before he spoke. What he said was, "I'm proud of you." He said it like it cost him something. "I know that doesn't fix anything," he said. "I know it might even make it worse, but I'm saying it because it's true, and because I spent 5 years believing I'd lost a daughter to her own bad choices. And what I actually lost her to was my own bad choices. And I need you to know that I know the difference." "Dad," I said. He looked up. "I know you do," I said. He nodded. He stood up. He put his hand on my desk, not reaching for me, just placing it there, like he needed something solid. Then he left. "Monica and I have not spoken. I don't know that we will. What I know is this. She called my medical school twice. She told our grandmother I was homeless. She maintained a lie for 5 years because the alternative was the conversation where she admitted what she'd done. She chose 5 years of architecture over 1 moment of honesty, and she built it so well that it only collapsed when she ended up on my operating table. I don't know what she expected to feel when she found out. I don't know if she expected to feel anything. I've stopped trying to understand the internal logic of people who do things like this, because I've come to believe that internal logic isn't always the right frame. Sometimes people just do terrible things, and the reasons are smaller and pettier and more human than we want them to be. I do know that she is alive because I cut well and stitched well, and did not let my hands shake for 3 hours and 41 minutes. She can do with that what she wants. 6 months later, Nathan and I had my parents for dinner on a Sunday in September. It was the first time they had been to our house. The evening was careful and a little formal in the way that new things are, and my father talked too much at the beginning and too little at the end, and my mother kept touching things in our kitchen like she was memorizing the space. After dinner, she asked to see photos of our wedding. I showed her. She looked at each one for a long time. "You were beautiful," she said. "I know," I said. She almost laughed, which is the closest thing to an apology that my family has ever been good at. I still have the documentation folder. I did not show it to Monica. I did not file charges, though my attorney, Elena Vasquez, 12 years in civil litigation, Hartford-based, reviewed the file and told me what my options were, in writing, in the careful way she had of laying out realities without editorializing about them. I kept that letter too. I didn't need to use any of it. I had already used the only thing that ever mattered. I had become impossible to dismiss. The name on my department door says everything the returned letter couldn't. Every patient I have ever stabilized, every resident I have trained, every 3 a.m. pager I have answered, all of it is proof. The kind of proof that doesn't require anyone's permission to exist. The kind that was already there, documented and signed, long before my family walked into a waiting room and finally had to read it. My mother asked me once, toward the end of that September dinner, whether I had been angry. She asked it quietly, slowly, sideways, the way you ask questions you're not sure you deserve answers to. I thought about it honestly. I said, for a long time. And now, I picked up my coffee cup. I looked at her, at the gray at her temples, and the way her hands had gotten older, and the slippers on the wrong feet that she hadn't noticed in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. because her child was in surgery and terror doesn't check your footwear. Now, I said, I'm just a surgeon who worked very hard and kept very good records. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room held it for both of us.